Welcome to the Tech Talks by Microsoft EMEA. My name is Manfred Helber. I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in the category Cloud and Data Center, and I'm looking forward to your questions in the chat about Microsoft technologies, about Microsoft licensing. So I'm here for the next hour for your questions. I will answer directly in the chat. Till you enter your questions, till I pick them up and answer the questions, I will give you a short introduction about the next topics we have planned for the Tech Talks in the next days, in the next weeks. So, for example, on December the 5th, so next Monday, we have the Azure Stack HCI resiliency topic. I'm looking forward to have you there. And feel free to use the time now to enter your questions into the chat. Next Monday, we will talk about Azure Stack HCI resiliency, about drives and all the things in there. On December the 12th, we will talk about Azure Stack HCI networking. Networking is a very important topic. And on December 13th, we will have another Tech Talk Q&A, another hour for your questions, licensing, technical stuff, whatever you are interested in the Microsoft ecosystem. And December the 19th, we have the Azure Stack HCI Security Tech Talk. But today, we have time for your questions. And till you enter your first questions into the chat, I will use some time for some topics I have prepared till you have any questions around the Microsoft ecosystem. For example, last Tech Talk Q&A, we had some information I brought with me about the licensing things in Windows Server and in Azure Stack HCI. And we discussed one topic there when we talk about licensing. I explained to you that we have in Windows Server or for Windows Server included extended security updates when we are running the workload on Azure Stack HCI. So this is important to know because this is a big advantage. When we think about the end of support for Windows Server 2012 and 2012 R2, we will have in October next year. This means that Windows Server 2012 and 2012 Release 2 will go end of support in October 2023. If you want to run the server operating systems after this end of support date, they will still continue to work, so you can still run this physical and virtual machines. But if you want to receive security updates for the systems after the October 2023, you will need extended security update subscription. And this extended security update subscription is included in Azure Stack HCI. So when we have an Azure Stack HCI environment and we have an Azure Stack HCI subscription plan, or we have Windows Server with software assurance, then we have Windows Server with software assurance and the workload runs on Azure Stack HCI, then we can enable our systems for this extended security updates. I'm often asked how this works, and I want to give you a short live demo about how to configure the extended security updates for Windows Server operating systems on Azure Stack HCI. But I'm starting first. So Windows Admin Center session, and inside this Windows Admin Center session, I will authenticate here. Oh, this is the wrong Windows Admin Center. We need this Windows Admin Center here. This one. I have several Windows Admin Center installations for different demo environments here, and this is the Windows Admin Center I want to use here. Okay. And on this Windows Admin Center, I have several Azure Stack HCI hosts and Azure Stack HCI clusters in management. I want to connect to one of these Azure Stack HCI clusters, the Azure Stack HCI cluster 01. And let's wait till the dashboard is loaded. There we'll see that this cluster is, it's activated. It's connected to Azure. So the subscription information is delivered. The Azure connectivity is green. It's connected here. This is what we can see here. When we jump to Azure, we can also see this machine here in Azure. I have to authenticate. This is interesting because I thought my session is already there. Let's see if the password is correct. So now I'm connected to this cluster in Azure. Both nodes are there. The second node has some issue with the Azure Arc integration, but this is not relevant for our topic we are discussing now in the next minutes. When I'm going to settings, and when I go to the Azure Stack HCI registration in the Windows Admin Center, I can see this cluster is registered, the cluster is Azure Arc enabled, and this cluster is connected. So everything is green here. I've seen this Arc integration thing, but we can fix this maybe later. So now the important thing is to know that virtual machines on this host run on Azure Stack HCI. Let's check the servers. When I'm going to servers, these are my physical hosts here. These are my Azure Stack HCI nodes. My specific scenario, these are demo machines. I can see here, they are Azure Stack HCI OS. They are version 2020 H2. Here I only have the version. When I click on the machine, I will also receive the information about the operating system. Here, Microsoft OS name Azure Stack HCI. This is what's installed there. So when I'm creating virtual machines or running virtual machines there, new virtual machines or imported virtual machines, these virtual machines are running on Azure Stack HCI. This is clear so far. Virtual machine 01, 02, 03. These machines, they are running on Azure Stack HCI. But none of these virtual machines will receive the Azure benefits because they run on Azure Stack HCI, but they don't know about it. So it's important to introduce the extended capabilities of Azure to these virtual machines. And the actual way is to go to Settings in the Windows Admin Center. And in Settings on the Azure Stack HCI cluster, we have an own Azure Stack HCI area. We have everything about Azure Stack HCI, the registration, monitoring, service health. We have the resource bridge, Arc VM setup. We have the activation of Windows Server VMs on Azure Stack HCI, and we have the Azure benefits. This is the important thing we have to configure. We must configure the Azure benefits to enable these benefits like extended security updates for virtual machines on Azure Stack HCI. I will continue with my live demo, but if you have any questions also about other topics, keep in mind, this is the TechTalk Q&A, so you can ask everything you want out of the Microsoft ecosystem, questions about Windows Server, licensing, Hyper-V, Azure Stack HCI, and so on. I will continue with the live demo about the Azure benefits here. So before we activate the Azure benefits, I want to check a few things with you. Let's go to the virtual switches. I have to close some tabs here. So I'm going to the virtual switches. And here we can see actually we have a compute switch on both nodes, no additional switches. Let's also check one of the server nodes. We go to the servers. We can see in the inventory, we have the server Azure Stack HCI 08 and 09. Let's open the 08 in a new tab. This opens a connectivity, a new window, and I can connect to the server 08 here. I have to look at the firewall because I want to show you something that happens here. When we go to the incoming rules, we have some Azure Stack HCI IDM attestation rule. This one here. And these policies, they are disabled. Let's see what happens here, and I will give you an explanation afterwards. Last thing we have to check, let's go to the virtual machines, and let's, for example, enable the Azure benefits on the virtual machine number 1 here in the list, this machine here. When we go to the settings of this machine, and to the networks, then we can see this machine actually has one network adapter, and this one is connected to the compute switch. This is the situation. So we have one switch in the cluster settings. We have virtual machines running, and now we want to enable in the settings the Azure benefits. I'm going to the Azure benefits. And here we can see Azure benefits can be turned on, but actually it's not activated. It's a preview feature. It's available for customers, but it's in preview regarding the technical perspective. Now let's turn on the Azure benefits. I will uncheck this option, turn on for all existing VMs. Microsoft recommends it to do. I don't recommend it to do. I will explain it to you in a few minutes. We will see why. And now let's turn on the Azure benefits. So it takes a while because there will be many configuration changes in this Azure Stack HCI cluster regarding the virtual switches. This is the reason why we had to look at the virtual switch list. Regarding the firewall rules, this is the reason why we check the firewall rules. And when we activate the Azure benefits for a virtual machine, also for this specific virtual machine. So let's wait for this configuration to finish here. It says it could take a few minutes because it receives a specific service on the nodes. Let's see if I have a slide where I can show this to you. Usually I have one here in the presentations. Yeah. This is exactly what happens here. So we have the Azure Cloud. We have the attestation service, the nodes, and they receive a certificate from Azure that ensures that we are eligible to use the benefits on these nodes on these specific virtual machines. So let's see what the configuration does. It's still configuring the Azure benefits. We will also see the activation of the Azure benefits in the Azure portal. And now we can see successfully turned on Azure benefits. So regarding the job, it has already finished. So the steps we can see here in the Windows Admin Center are more or less some refresh action here. Okay, now we can see Azure benefits are turned on this cluster. So they are on. they are not configured for any virtual machine, but we have several virtual machines that could be used to enable the Azure benefits here in this configuration. Okay, so let's first check the cluster. When we go to the cluster, we can see the Azure benefits are activated and the expiration day is 29th December 2022. Today, we have the 29th of November. So it's 30 days from today because the Azure benefits are available on Azure Stack HCI for activated Azure Stack HCI clusters. And if you followed one of my webcasts, previous TechTalk webcasts, I already explained that we have to connect to Azure minimum once every 30 days to ensure that we keep all the benefits active of Azure Stack HCI. We need a connectivity minimum once every 30 days. And here we have the situation that we can see that the 30 days are used with a certificate that ensures that I can also use these benefits in this time till the next refresh occurs. We have several questions in the chat. I will pick them up, but we have one question that matches here exactly. Hi, Manfred, still a question? There are no silly questions. Any reason why Azure benefits are not turned on by default, please? So the Azure benefits will change something in the configuration. I will mention this. And maybe you don't want this in your environment. And this is the reason why they are not enabled by default. And this is the reason why I recommended to you to not enable the Azure benefits for every virtual machine. We only should do this for the virtual machines we need, the Azure benefits. So when we look at the virtual machine list, we said, okay, let's activate the Azure benefits for this first virtual machine. Let's imagine we need the extended security updates in the VM01. And maybe we have the Data Center Azure edition in the virtual machine 03. Then we should only activate the Azure benefits for these two virtual machines and not for the virtual machine 02. Why? Let's see what happens here. I activate the Azure benefits for this machine, VM01. It says again, this can take some time till the Azure benefits are activated. It's typically faster than the base configuration of the Azure benefits on the cluster. Let's wait for this. Now it's turned on. Azure benefits in the notification, they are turned on. Now we have the Azure benefits here on this machine. Server benefits or benefits are activated. Host server is the host 01. Now let's check what happened in the virtual switches. In the virtual switches, we will see there's another virtual switch. It was created. I was not asked to create this switch. It was done by the Azure benefits configuration. We looked here 10 minutes ago. There was no AZ SHCI host IMDS do not modify internal switch. So it's important to know that the activation of Azure benefits on an Azure Stack HCI cluster creates this switch. This is not a big issue, but if you deploy additional services and if you run a cluster validation, then you will see a segmented network because this internal switch here is able to have a communication between host and VM, but not between or across the hosts. This is only possible with an external switch. Okay, so switch on the host. Let's check what changed in the virtual machines. Let's go to the virtual machines. And then check the virtual machine 01. And when I now go to settings and network, then we can see, oops, this virtual machine has a second network adapter. This is connected to this new internal switch we have on each node. And the host now communicates between or via this internal virtual switch with the virtual machine, and the virtual machine connects via this network interface with the host attestation service on the Azure Stack HCI host to verify if this machine is eligible to receive extended security updates, to activate the Data Center Azure Edition, and so on. So, and because maybe you don't want this on every machine, it's not configured automatically. So it's your decision. It's important that you know that this happens, because this could have an impact on services inside the VM, could have an impact on firewall configuration inside the VM, and so on. This is the main reason why this is not activated by default, because as the name says, these are benefits, these are additional advantages I can use with Azure Stack HCI without being charged additionally. And the question is, why is this the solution Microsoft has taken? Because an alternate option really would be to use the integration services. I assume you have seen this is in preview. So my understanding is, or I think that the implementation via an additional virtual network interface was easier possible, was faster to bring to market in this preview state. And in the final version, I would prefer to have something like integration services. Let's check the firewall rules. What happened here? These two rules, status disabled. I will refresh the list here. And now we can see these two firewall rules are enabled. And these firewall rules, these here, they are because of Azure benefits. Host attestation service. So host attestation service, they are too restrictive. So this is, let's say, I'm back in the preview version of the Azure benefits. So what happens if these rules are enabled? You are not able to connect to this cluster via failover cluster manager any longer. You're not able to use cluster aware updating. You will have several tasks in the Windows Admin Center that are not usable any longer. So today in the preview, it's important to know that you should disable these two rules when you enable the Azure benefits. In the final release, maybe the complete architecture will change, how the Azure benefits are presented to the machine. But now we have the situation, I disabled these two rules here. I think the second one is also disabled. Let's check this here. Both are disabled. Now I can use cluster aware updating. I can use the failover cluster manager. I can use all the things in Windows Admin Center, and I receive the extended security updates within this virtual machine 01, where I activated the Azure benefits for. I will not receive the extended security updates in the virtual machine 02 or 03 because they don't have the Azure benefits activated here. So it's always an activation of Azure benefits. So hopefully this was an understandable explanation here. So we had another question. Hello, what is the best way to migrate an on-premises machine to Hyper-V? Do you have a good copy tool? So an on-premises machine to Hyper-V on-premises, or is the question to Azure? If I want to migrate to Azure, there's a tool called Azure Migrate. This is the recommendation from Microsoft. And the Azure Migrate, I can show this to you. Azure Migrate. This is the wrong page. Azure Migrate Cloud Services. Here we have the landing page for Azure Migrate. I can bring this to the chat. Azure Migrate. So if your question is more to move to an Hyper-V host on premises with a physical host, then there are different ways. One tool that works, that is very a basic tool, is the disk to VHD. This is this tool here. Disk to VHD does not create a virtual machine. It creates a virtual hard disk file from a physical host. Important is to uninstall hardware specific drivers or things like this. It's in sysinternals tools, as you can see here by Mark Rosinovich. It was not initially published on October 2021. This is a tool we have already for years. It was published in this version 2.02. And with this virtual hard disk file, you can create a new virtual machine on your Hyper-V host and attach this virtual hard disk file. Then you have a running virtual machine. So to migrate to Azure, Azure Migrate, to convert a physical server into a virtual machine, disk to VHD, but you have several manual steps. First, you convert the hard disk via disk to VHD. Then you will create a new virtual machine and attach this hard disk. And there are several third-party tools in the market you can use to convert from physical to virtual. So there are several tools in the market. Okay, hopefully this was a suitable answer to the question for this migration thing or tool. If you want to migrate from Hyper-V to Hyper-V, so from Windows Server 2016, for example, to 2022, you can use the export import in the Hyper-V manager. You can use the Hyper-V replica, or you can even use the Hyper-V live migration with the storage live migration across the servers. Feel free to add comments or questions if you need additional information. Then we have another question. Hello, Manfred. I'm currently migrating from server 2019 to 2022. The in-place upgrade did not work on the domain controller. Now I'm doing a side-by-side migration from the two domain controllers, but sure how to use DC Promo. With Windows Server 2019 and 2022, I get the message the Active Directory domain service installation wizard has been moved to Server Manager. The DC Promo command is not any longer available. So the question is what you want to do, Ralph. Do you want to install the domain controller, or do you want to uninstall the older one, the older domain controller? So the domain controller installation works in adding the Active Directory domain controller or Active Directory domain services. Let's check this on one of my virtual demo machines. Okay, let's go here. And let's switch to a virtual machine here, for example, the server. What's this machine doing here? Server 2. Let's take this machine. So the first step is to, I already configured this machine as a domain controller. This is not possible. Okay, so we'll take this machine here. So the first step should be to add the new domain controller to the existing domain. I did this on this machine. So this is a machine that is already part of an existing domain. And then I'm adding roles and features. And then I have a role-based or feature-based deployment. And then I'm installing Active Directory domain services and DNS. This is what I need on a domain controller. I receive an error message that this server has no static IP. I will ignore this. In a physical or in real life deployment, you should configure fixed IP addresses for domain controller or work with DHCP reservations and ensure that your DHCP server is available even if you have issues with the Active Directory domain infrastructure. So, but for us, I think this is fine. This is a spontaneous live demo as an answer on this question. So I install the services here. And when I've finished the installation, I will see a notification here on the top in this notification area where I can configure these Active Directory services and promote this server to a domain controller. Now, Ralph adds, it is a question about uninstallation. If you uninstall, it's the same situation. We can do this on this machine. We go to manage, add or remove roles and features. Then we go to remove roles and features. And we remove the Active Directory domain services. And it says, okay, there's an Active Directory on this machine. I want to demote this server. This is also done via the wizard. Before you do this, you should ensure that you don't have the uninstallation. So you have to move the FSMO roles. So before you uninstall the services, you have to ensure that you move, not uninstall, sorry, this was wrong, that you move the flexible single master options, the FSMO role owners to a server that will remain in the domain. This is important if you will demote the server you installed first in your environment with Active Directory. But this is a good thing. Ralph was asking about uninstallation, and this is what I can show in the D202 environment, because here I told you this is, I assume, already a domain controller. Let's check this. I'm going to Active Directory users and computers. I'm going to the domain controllers. Yes, this one here is a domain controller. I could go to manage, remove roles and features. And here on this machine, I could say, I want to uninstall Active Directory domain services. And it will start the wizard for the uninstallation. The initial shows that I can demote here. You will first see this error here, but then you click on demote this domain controller, and then you will see the wizard. This is what you started in the previous versions with DC Promo, and now you have the demotion wizard. Ralph, I think you know this because you were searching for this, starting with the newer versions, Windows Server 2022, 2019. We have the situation that we cannot use DC Promo any longer. If I'm using this here, DC Promo, it says, okay, this has moved to the server manager here. And this is exactly how it works. So hopefully this was a suitable answer to your question, Ralph. If not, feel free to ask again. Yes, this is exactly what I tried to explain. You need to transfer all FSMO roles to the second domain controller, then uninstall the DC role from the DC1, which will let you to demote the first. This is the correct workflow, Helmut, absolutely. This is not absolutely correct regarding the situation about the FSMO roles and the fallback mechanism. So if we have FSMO roles on this machine, and we demote this server, it will be possible to demote. And this is the reason why I said it's important to move the FSMO roles. If you forget it, this wizard will try to move the FSMO roles. But if there goes something wrong, you will have a lot of work to fix this. So it's absolutely to recommend to follow the flow Helmut explained. It's absolutely correct. The only thing to mention is when we demote the first DC, we can unfortunately do it if it still has, even if it still has the FSMO roles, but in this case, the wizard will try to move the roles. Okay, thanks for this question. If you have anything to add, please feel free to ask. Then we have a question. Can you please explain how guest OS licensing works in Azure Stack HCI with software assurance? Do you still require CALs for the guest? Sorry, licensing you here. Nothing to say sorry for. Licensing is absolutely a topic that is important because licensing also changes from time to time. So let's have a look at an cluster here. I have to switch to a physical installation of a cluster here. And I want to go to this cluster here. It's an Azure Stack HCI cluster. And what I did here on this cluster, when I go to the settings, in Azure Stack HCI registration, I have the Activate Windows Server VMs area. Here, these are the Azure Stack HCI features or tools. Here we have the Activate Windows Server VMs option. Here on this cluster, I can see I have Windows Server VM activation is configured, and this is configured via the Windows Server subscription, the activation method. There are different activation methods. And the Windows Server subscription, if we use this subscription, we have included, oh no, this is wrong. We don't need additional client access licenses. So this means we have Azure Stack HCI. We are running Windows Server on Azure Stack HCI. We have here the activation method, Windows Server subscription. And this means we don't need any additional client access licenses for the workload running on these virtual machines on the Azure Stack HCI cluster. If we have another Azure Stack HCI cluster where we don't have the activation method, Windows Server subscription active, then for sure we need client access licenses for accessing Windows servers on this other Azure Stack HCI cluster. Or if we have physical Windows servers or Windows servers as VMs on a Hyper-V host, then we need the client access licenses. As you know, the client access licenses are not needed per target server. The client access licenses are needed per user or per device. And if my user Manfred, for example, has a Windows Server 2019 client access licenses, I'm allowed to access Windows Server 2019 servers and previous versions, but not Windows Server 2022. If I have Windows Server 2022 client access licenses, I can access, or I'm allowed to access, Windows Server 2022 and every previous version. For the servers that are activated based on the Windows Server subscription, we don't need CALs. So regarding your question, Can you please explain how guest OS licensing works? This is one of the options. I will explain you the other options also. In Azure Stack HCI with software assurance, do you still require calls for the guests? Sorry. So in this specific scenario, for these virtual machines running on this Azure Stack HCI cluster, I will not need any additional Windows Server client access licenses. If I'm running remote desktop services, I will need the RDS calls, but not the Windows Server client access license. So the question is, what does this cost? Let's go to the Azure pricing page. I will show this to you in a few minutes. So, and here I will go to the HCI, Azure Stack HCI pricing. And here we can see when I want to use the Azure subscription model, then we have the situation we will need the $10 per core per month. This is one component for the Azure Stack HCI OS. And we will need the Windows Server subscription. So here you can read this. Host service fee, it's Azure Stack HCI. It's $10 per physical core per month. And we have the add-on workloads. It's the Windows Server subscription. This is what I showed you in my configuration. It's $23 per core per month. When I bring this together, it's $33 per core per month. Both is for free 60 days after registering our Azure Stack HCI if we want to use this option. New is, since a few weeks, that we can use Windows Server Data Center with software assurance to receive this benefit and this benefit with $0. This is important. Both together with $0. It's not only the service fee for the Azure Stack HCI host OS, it's also the fee for the Windows Server subscription. Important is to enable both. So important is that you use your Azure Stack HCI cluster. You can use the Windows Admin Center, for example. Open the Azure portal. I can jump directly here via View Azure Resource. And then we have to go to the configuration. And there's an Azure benefit section. Here the Azure benefit is activated. Usually you have here a button where I draw the blue rectangle, so you will read there activate benefit. Then you click on there. What happens? The Azure portal checks if you, as a customer, you have an eligible software assurance subscription. If yes, the benefit is activated. If the system at Microsoft cannot find a software assurance, it will ask you to send a mail to a team at Microsoft that will activate the benefits for you on behalf. If you don't have a software assurance, you will not be eligible for it. This is for the Azure Stack HCI host OS. And then in the next step, you can activate the Windows Server subscription. You will again find a button here to activate it for the Windows Server subscription add-on. And when this is also activated, then both costs, Azure Host OS fee and Azure subscription fee, will be switched to $0 as we have seen it in the documentation. And then we have the situation that we are running, or we can run Windows Server in the VMs without needing client access licenses for the workload running on Azure Stack HCI. Important is to understand, if you have Azure Stack HCI and you pay for it $10 per core per month, and you have additionally Windows Server plus software assurance, and you don't activate this benefit, then you still need the CALs, not from the technical perspective, because there's no server where you have to enter a Windows Server client access license. But regarding the licensing, you are only have the situation that you don't need client access licenses for the workload if you activate the Windows Server benefit. So hopefully this was a suitable answer for your question here, how the licensing works. I explained the combination of Windows Server data center with software assurance enables you to be eligible for the Azure benefit configuration here and the guest OS usage, but you have to configure it in the Azure portal. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to ask them here, to send them in. Overall, for the licensing, you have two options. We have the Windows Server subscription on the one side. On the other hand, we have the bring your own licensing option. Bring your own license can be an OEM license, can be a volume license, can be a OEM license with software assurance, a volume license with software assurance, and so on. And with the bring your own license plus software assurance, this enables you to activate the Windows Server subscription via the portal. So happy I could help you. If you have any additional questions about licensing, so there are no easy questions about licensing. There are no stupid or questions about licensing. Licensing is a very, very complex topic. There are many options many customers don't know about where they can save a lot of money, but there are also many options customer think they are correct, but they are wrong from the licensing perspective. So really feel free to ask your questions. So Ralph is writing, he will test this. The FSMO roles are in DC1. I'm testing that on DC2, so he will remove a domain controller. And Helmut writes, if you are going to upgrade DC2 from server 2019 to 2022, you only need to demote DC2 and install 2020, then add the DC feature and wait for synchronization, and you are done. This would be possible, yes. Now the question is, what's the better way? It depends a little bit. So if everything is working fine on this DC2, you can decide for an in-place upgrade. If you maybe have seen some issues somewhere and you maybe have the feeling that something could go wrong there, you could have a misconfiguration, then the recommendation would be to do a clean reinstall here. Okay. Yeah, great Q&A session today, because many questions from your side. Feel free to send in any additional questions you have. We have 10 minutes left. And I want to show you on a machine where the activation is not configured, how it looks like from the Windows Admin Center perspective. So you have seen this view where we had the Azure benefits, VM benefits, or Azure subscription activated. This was the look and feel, here for Activate Windows Server VMs. This is how it looks in the Windows Admin Center when it's configured, the automatic virtual machine activation with the Windows Server subscription. Now, when I switch to the other environment here, and when I'm going to the settings and the activation of the VMs, this is the look and feel. If this is not configured, it says, okay, you have Azure Stack HCI running, but you don't have made the decision how to activate these machines running on Azure Stack HCI. I can click Set Up here, and there are two options. Option one is to use the Windows Server subscription I explained to you how we can switch the server subscription price from $23.30 to $0, because if you have an Windows Server data center software assurance licensing for your environment, then this could be an option. The second option is to use your existing Windows Server license. So let's first check the server subscription. Let's go to next. It says, okay, I've calculated this is the amount of cores you have, and this will be your costs, amount of cores multiplied with the amount or the price per core. The other option is that I use my existing license. This does not mean that I already have a license. This means I have the bring your own license scenario. And this requests me to enter a key for each host. It's an activation key. And this means that the automatic virtual machine activation will be used. So here I will enter my data center keys of Windows Server I have for each host. And I'm licensing, for example, via the OEM license. You know, each host needs a base license with minimum 16 cores, but all the cores have to be licensed. And I'm entering here the keys for each host. This is a 2-node cluster. So this nodes will be activated for AVMA. Now the question is, what do I have to do inside the VMs that the activation works? Here we have the situation that there are AVMA keys provided by Microsoft. So I will show this to you in this here. Automatic virtual machine activation. We'll bring this up in the chat. And with the automatic virtual machine activation, I have a list of keys here, and these keys are public available. So if I'm installing inside a VM on Azure Stack HCI, Windows Server 2022 standard, for example, I'm using exactly this key here. And when I'm using this key, the VM knows I have to ask the host for the activation. This usually only works on data center hosts, on activated Windows Server data center hosts. There's a matrix, so the newer version can always activate the previous Windows servers, but not vice versa. So in Azure Stack HCI, we have the situation that via entering the data center keys here, we activate the automatic virtual machine activation on the host. And then we have a question. Do you have any experience with SDN to Azure Stack HCI, SDN migrations, any advice, recommendations? Oh, the question is from VMware ESX, software-defined networking to Azure Stack HCI, software-defined networking. So unfortunately, no reference from the field. So this would be an individual thing to analyze the existing SDN infrastructure on your existing virtualization platform to transfer it to the SDN we have in Azure Stack HCI. SDN is a big topic in Azure Stack HCI, but because of its numerous options, it's also a very complex thing. So I think there's no default tool set or recommendation set. So it's really necessary to analyze what's actually configured, what the customer needs, and what options can be used in the Azure Stack HCI software-defined networking to solve these things. Okay, any more questions in the chat? Feel free to bring them up. If you will not be on time till the end of this live stream today, we have another Tech Talk Q&A where I would really be happy to have you there again with, again, these great questions, maybe follow-up questions, maybe additional questions about Azure Stack HCI, Windows Server migration. So really, really thank you very much for your questions you brought up today. So were all good questions, all questions that perfectly fit to the Tech Talk topics we usually have. And for sure, I'm also looking forward to have you in the next Tech Talk on next Monday, where we talk about Azure Stack HCI resiliency. So cache and drives, cluster, stretch cluster, I will explain you in detail how failovers work, what you have to take care about, how you configure the failover behavior, and so on. So thank you for your time joining this Tech Talk. Thank you for the feedback. So I'm happy that I could support you in your knowledge increase on Azure Stack HCI on Windows Server. And so I'm staying here for 2 or 3 additional minutes. And if you don't have any more questions, thank you very much for your time. Looking forward to see you on December the 5th. It's next week, Monday, for Azure Stack HCI resiliency. Same time we had the Tech Talk today, so it's 11:30 German time, and now depending on the time zone where you are watching, where we stream it again live on YouTube. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for joining this Tech Talk. Have a nice day. Bye.